Welcome to our YouTube video about Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most influential philosophers of the modern era. In this video, we will use Chat-GPT, a state-of-the-art language model, to provide insights and information on Nietzsche's life, philosophy, and legacy. Nietzsche's ideas continue to inspire and challenge us today, and we will explore some of his most profound and provocative concepts, from the Ubermensch and the will to power to his critiques of religion, morality, and modernity. Join us on this journey into the mind of Nietzsche and discover why he remains such a compelling and controversial figure in philosophy and culture. While I don't agree with Nietzsche on everything, he's still an important person to study. Okay, now we'll begin. Here's some information about Nietzsche's book The Will to Power. The Will to Power is a posthumous collection of Friedrich Nietzsche's notes and unpublished writings, edited and published by his sister Elizabeth I to Nietzsche after his death. The book consists of Nietzsche's ideas on the nature of human will, morality, the concept of the Superman, and the role of art and culture in society. It has been highly controversial and subject to varying interpretations, with some arguing that it represents Nietzsche's most developed and coherent philosophical system, while others maintain that it is a hodgepodge of fragments lacking in coherence and consistency. Some critics have also questioned the extent to which Nietzsche altered and manipulated the text to fit her own agenda. The Will to Power is a book compiled from the notes taken by Friedrich Nietzsche over several years, but which he never intended to publish as a whole. It is divided into several books and sections, but there is no definitive or agreed-upon number of chapters. The book has been published in various editions, with different organizations and numbers of sections and notes. The notes in The Will to Power cover a wide range of topics, including Nietzsche's ideas about morality, culture, religion, power, and human psychology. Some of the main points in the book include the rejection of traditional morality. Nietzsche argued that traditional values and moral codes were designed to oppress and limit individuals, and that people should reject these outdated ideas in favor of creating their own values. The Will to Power. Nietzsche believed that the desire for power and dominance was the primary motivating force behind human behavior, and that individuals should strive to become the masters of their own destinies. The Ubermensch. Nietzsche envisioned a future in which a new kind of human being, the Ubermensch, would rise up to transcend the limitations of traditional morality and create their own values. The death of God. Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead, meaning that traditional religious beliefs were no longer relevant in modern society. The importance of individualism. Nietzsche emphasized the importance of individualism and personal autonomy, and believed that individuals should strive to become their own masters rather than relying on external sources of authority. These are just a few of the many ideas and themes explored in The Will to Power, which remains a controversial and influential work in the history of philosophy. Here are 10 additional themes from Nietzsche's The Will to Power. The idea of a Superman who represents the highest potential of humanity. The rejection of traditional morality in favor of individualistic and life-affirming values. The concept of the eternal recurrence, which suggests that all events in the universe are cyclical and will repeat indefinitely. The idea that art is the highest form of human expression and that it has the power to create new values. The importance of embracing one's own suffering and pain as a means of personal growth and transformation. The concept of the will to power as a fundamental driving force behind all human behavior. The rejection of traditional religion and the idea that humanity should create its own values and beliefs. The critique of modernity and the belief that it has led to the decline of Western civilization. The idea that truth is subjective and that there is no objective reality that exists independently of human perception. The importance of living in the present moment and embracing the uncertainty and chaos of life. Here are a few quotes from Nietzsche's The Will to Power. All beings so far have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beasts rather than overcome man. What is the ape to man? A laughingstock or a painful embarrassment. And man shall be just that for the overman, a laughingstock or a painful embarrassment. You have made your way from worm to man, and much in you is still worm. Once you were apes, and even now, too, man is more ape than any ape. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. What does your conscience say? You shall become the person you are. The true man wants two things, danger and play. For that reason he wants woman, as the most dangerous plaything. There is not enough love and goodness in the world to permit giving any of it away to imaginary beings. One ought to hold on to one's heart, for if one lets it go, one soon loses control of the head too. The man of knowledge must be able not only to love his enemies but also to hate his friends. In every real man a child is hidden that wants to play. Tell me more about Nietzsche's concept of the Overman or Ubermensch. The concept of the Ubermensch, or Superman, is one of Nietzsche's most famous ideas. The Ubermensch is a person who transcends conventional morality and is free from the constraints of society. According to Nietzsche, the Ubermensch is not bound by traditional values and is instead driven by a desire for self-expression and the pursuit of excellence. The Ubermensch is not an ideal that can be achieved through external means but rather an internal state of being. Nietzsche believed that the Ubermensch could only be attained through an act of self-creation, a process he referred to as the revaluation of all values. In his view, the pursuit of the Ubermensch requires a rejection of traditional morality and a willingness to embrace risk, uncertainty, and the unknown. The Ubermensch is not a static ideal but a dynamic process of self-creation that involves an ongoing struggle to transcend one's limitations and to achieve a higher level of consciousness. Nietzsche believed that the Ubermensch would be the ultimate goal of human evolution, representing a new type of humanity that would be more creative, more powerful, and more capable of self-realization than any previous human being. Give me an example of Nietzsche's life-affirming values. One example of Nietzsche's life-affirming values is his philosophy of Amor Fati, which means love of fate or acceptance of one's fate. Nietzsche believed that individuals should embrace their lives and all of their experiences, including the difficult ones, rather than trying to escape or avoid them. He believed that individuals should strive to overcome adversity and grow stronger from their challenges, rather than succumbing to despair or nihilism. Other examples of life-affirming values in Nietzsche's philosophy include creativity, individualism, and the pursuit of excellence. Explain Nietzsche's theory of eternal recurrence in greater detail. Nietzsche's theory of eternal recurrence suggests that the universe is cyclical and that everything that has happened before will happen again, infinitely. According to Nietzsche, the idea of eternal recurrence should be embraced as a life-affirming philosophy that encourages people to live their lives to the fullest, since every action will be repeated over and over again. This theory is intended to promote a sense of responsibility and encourage individuals to make the most of their lives, since each choice they make will have a lasting impact that will be felt again and again throughout eternity. Nietzsche believed that the realization of eternal recurrence could be a profound and transformative experience, leading to a sense of enlightenment and liberation. However, he also acknowledged that the idea could be terrifying for some people, particularly those who live with regret or who are uncomfortable with the concept of eternal repetition. Nietzsche viewed the acceptance of eternal recurrence as a test of an individual's will to power, or their ability to face and overcome the challenges of existence. Here's some more information about Nietzsche's feelings about art in general. Nietzsche had a complex relationship with art. He believed that art was an essential aspect of human existence, as it allowed individuals to transcend the limitations of everyday life and connect with the sublime. However, he also believed that art had been corrupted by the values of society and was being used as a tool to manipulate people's perceptions of reality. He argued that art should be created for its own sake, rather than for the sake of social or political agendas, and that it should be free from any external constraints or obligations. Nietzsche also believed that art had the power to transform individuals and society, and that it was the duty of the artist to create works that challenged conventional ways of thinking and living. He believed that art was an expression of the individual will to power, and that it could help individuals to achieve self-mastery and overcome the limitations of their existence. Overall, Nietzsche saw art as a powerful tool for personal and societal transformation, but he also recognized the dangers of its abuse by those seeking power and control. Tell me more about Nietzsche's idea of the will to power. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is the driving force behind all human behavior. He believed that all living things possess this will to power, which he described as the fundamental drive to exert control and exert oneself in the world. Nietzsche saw the will to power as the central principle of life, with all other values and ideals deriving from it. Nietzsche believed that the will to power could be expressed in a variety of ways, from physical force and aggression to intellectual creativity and achievement. He argued that the desire for power was not necessarily a negative or destructive force, but rather the natural impulse that drives us to overcome our limitations and create something new and powerful. According to Nietzsche, the will to power is not just about dominating others or amassing wealth and status, but also about overcoming oneself and striving to reach new heights of achievement and self-realization. He saw the will to power as a positive and life-affirming force, one that could lead to the creation of new values and ideals that could transform the world. Here are a few examples of Nietzsche's ideas on modernity and how it's hurting society. Nietzsche was critical of modernity, which he believed was responsible for the decline of Western civilization. He argued that modernity was characterized by a focus on reason and utility, which had led to the loss of traditional values and the rise of nihilism. He believed that the modern world was becoming increasingly superficial and that people were losing touch with their inner selves and their instincts. Nietzsche also believed that modernity was marked by a decline in individualism and the rise of mass culture. He saw this as a dangerous trend, as he believed that the creativity and vitality of a culture could only come from the individual genius of its members. Nietzsche also criticized the modern world's obsession with progress and the belief in universal truths. He believed that the search for universal truths was misguided, and that people should instead focus on their own personal truths and values. He argued that the pursuit of progress was driven by a desire for power and domination, rather than a genuine desire to improve the human condition. Overall, Nietzsche saw modernity as a deeply flawed and unhealthy state of being, and believed that individuals should strive to create their own values and to live in accordance with their own instincts and passions. Tell me about Nietzsche's idea of perspectivism, the idea that there are no facts, only interpretations. Nietzsche's idea of perspectivism is the belief that there are no objective or absolute truths, only individual perspectives or interpretations of reality. He argued that all knowledge is subjective and depends on individual perceptions and interpretations, shaped by one's cultural, historical, and psychological factors. Therefore, what is true or real for one person may not be true or real for another. According to Nietzsche, the traditional philosophical view of objective truth and absolute values leads to nihilism, a sense of meaninglessness and lack of purpose in life. In contrast, he believed that perspectivism can lead to creativity, individuality, and self-expression, as individuals are free to create their own values and meanings in life. Nietzsche emphasized the importance of exploring different perspectives and challenging one's own assumptions, in order to develop a more nuanced and complex understanding of the world. How did Nietzsche say we should overcome nihilism? Nietzsche believed that nihilism, or the rejection of all religious, moral, and political principles, was a necessary stage for the emergence of the Ubermensch, or the ideal human being. To overcome nihilism, Nietzsche argued that individuals must create their own values and meaning in life, rather than relying on external authorities to provide it for them. This involved embracing life-affirming values, taking responsibility for one's actions, and constantly striving to improve oneself. Ultimately, Nietzsche believed that the key to overcoming nihilism was to create a new, life-affirming culture that celebrated creativity, individualism, and the pursuit of excellence. Give me a comparison of Nietzsche's will to power and Schopenhauer's will to live. Nietzsche's will to power and Schopenhauer's will to live are similar in the sense that they both describe a fundamental drive that underlies human existence. However, they differ in their interpretation of this drive. Schopenhauer's will to live is a pessimistic and fatalistic concept, which he sees as the source of all suffering in the world. In contrast, Nietzsche's will to power is a positive and life-affirming concept, which he sees as the source of all creativity and growth in the world. According to Nietzsche, the will to power is the fundamental drive that motivates all human action. It is the desire to overcome obstacles, to achieve one's goals, and to become stronger and more powerful. Nietzsche sees this drive as a positive and life-affirming force, which is necessary for human growth and creativity. He argues that the will to power should be embraced, rather than suppressed or denied, in order to achieve true self-realization and fulfillment. Schopenhauer's will to live, on the other hand, is a more pessimistic concept. He sees it as the source of all suffering in the world, because it is the drive that motivates us to seek out pleasure and avoid pain. According to Schopenhauer, the will to live is insatiable and can never be satisfied, which leads to a constant cycle of desire and suffering. He argues that the only way to overcome this suffering is through asceticism, or the denial of the will to live. In summary, while both Nietzsche's will to power and Schopenhauer's will to live describe a fundamental drive that underlies human existence, they differ in their interpretation of this drive. Nietzsche sees the will to power as a positive and life-affirming force, while Schopenhauer sees the will to live as the source of all suffering in the world. Tell me about Nietzsche's book Ecce Homo? Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One is a book written by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. It was one of the last books he wrote before he went insane. The book is a reflection on his life and his work, as well as an attempt to explain his philosophy to the public. In the book, Nietzsche discusses his childhood, his early interests and influences, and his academic career. He also discusses his views on morality, religion, and the role of the artist in society. He offers his thoughts on his own works, including The Spoke Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil. The book is notable for its autobiographical content, and for the insights it provides into Nietzsche's life and thought. It has been called a work of genius by some, and a work of madness by others. Regardless, it remains an important work in the history of philosophy, and a testament to Nietzsche's unique and powerful voice. Tell me about the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is a philosophical novel by Friedrich Nietzsche, first published in 1883. The book chronicles the fictional travels and speeches of the character Zarathustra, a Persian prophet who proclaims the death of God and the advent of the Superman, or Ubermensch. The book is divided into 4 parts, with each part depicting a different stage in Zarathustra's journey. Through his speeches, Zarathustra conveys Nietzsche's ideas on morality, human nature, and the human condition. The book is often seen as a work of philosophical fiction and is considered one of Nietzsche's most influential works. Some of the main themes in the book include the rejection of traditional morality and the idea of the eternal recurrence. The book also contains many of Nietzsche's famous aphorisms, including "God is dead and what does not kill me, makes me stronger." Thus Spoke Zarathustra has been the subject of much scholarly debate and interpretation. Some readers see it as a work of irony and satire, while others view it as a serious philosophical work. Despite its complex themes and challenging prose, the book has remained a popular and influential work in philosophy and literature. Give me a summary of Part 1 of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Part 1 of Thus Spoke Zarathustra introduces the main character, Zarathustra, who descends from his solitude in the mountains to speak to humanity. He proclaims the death of God, and exhorts people to reject traditional values and create their own meaning. He meets various individuals on his journey, including a wise old man, a priest, and a group of people who are watching a tightrope walker. Zarathustra preaches to them, challenging their beliefs and telling them to embrace the superhuman ideal of the Ubermensch. The book explores themes of the death of God, the will to power, and the importance of creating meaning in one's life. The second part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra consists of a series of speeches and encounters between Zarathustra and various characters. Zarathustra begins by saying that he has come to bring the good news of the Overman to the people. He also speaks of the importance of the individual and the need for one to overcome oneself in order to grow and improve. Zarathustra encounters a number of characters, including the ugliest man, the voluntary beggar, and the sorcerer. Each of these characters has something to teach Zarathustra, and he learns from them as he continues his quest to spread the word of the Overman. One of the most significant encounters in the second part of the book is that between Zarathustra and the devil. The devil challenges Zarathustra's belief in the Overman, and the two engage in a debate about the nature of good and evil. Through this encounter, Zarathustra comes to a deeper understanding of his own beliefs and is strengthened in his resolve to spread his message. The second part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra ends with Zarathustra returning to the mountains, where he reflects on his experiences and prepares himself for the next phase of his journey. Overall, the second part of the book is focused on the theme of personal growth and self-overcoming, as Zarathustra seeks to become the best version of himself and to inspire others to do the same. The third part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra begins with Zarathustra descending from his mountain hermitage to seek out his fellow men once more. He meets a group of people who are mourning a dead man and teaching their children about the concept of eternal recurrence, that life repeats itself in an endless cycle. Zarathustra teaches them that they should not cling to the past, but must embrace life's eternal recurrence in order to become the Overman or Superman. Zarathustra then encounters a saintly old man who has renounced all material possessions and seeks only knowledge and wisdom. The old man tells Zarathustra that he should seek out a city where people still worship a god, for in this city Zarathustra will find his greatest challenge. Zarathustra then journeys to the city and encounters various characters, including a jester who mocks him and a sorcerer who attempts to seduce him. Eventually, Zarathustra delivers a series of speeches in the city, in which he denounces the old god and proclaims the coming of the Overman. The people of the city reject his message and Zarathustra departs, but not before encountering a group of children who understand and embrace his teachings. The fourth part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra consists of 22 speeches and deals with the idea of the eternal recurrence. Zarathustra announces that the concept of the eternal recurrence is the most profound thought of all, as it implies that every moment is repeated infinitely. Zarathustra argues that one must embrace this idea and not be discouraged by it but live life as if every moment is worth repeating for eternity. This section ends with Zarathustra's announcement of the death of God and the need for humanity to create new values to replace the ones that have been lost. Tell me about Nietzsche's book Beyond Good and Evil. Beyond Good and Evil is a philosophical work by Friedrich Nietzsche, published in 1886. The book is divided into 9 parts and features aphorisms, essays, and maxims. Nietzsche presents a critique of traditional morality, philosophy, and religion, and argues for the creation of a new morality and a new type of human being, whom he calls the free spirit. He advocates for the revaluation of all values, rejecting the idea of absolute truth and morality and arguing that what is good or bad is not absolute, but relative to the individual or culture. He also critiques the Christian moral system and argues that it is fundamentally life-denying and nihilistic, valuing weakness and humility over strength and power. The book has had a significant influence on modern philosophy and is considered a classic of Western thought. Part 1 of Beyond Good and Evil is titled On the Prejudices of Philosophers. In this section, Nietzsche argues that most philosophers have failed to question the fundamental assumptions that underlie their ideas, and that they have been blinded by their own prejudices. He calls for a re-evaluation of all values and a new, more critical approach to philosophy. Nietzsche argues that traditional morality is based on a slave mentality that sees weakness and suffering as virtues, and that it is time for a new morality based on strength and power. He also criticizes the concept of free will and argues that human actions are determined by biological and environmental factors. Nietzsche's critique of traditional philosophy extends to the concept of truth itself. He argues that there is no objective truth, and that all knowledge is subjective and based on interpretation. He also criticizes the tendency to see the world in binary terms, such as good and evil, and argues that there are many shades of gray. Overall, Part 1 of Beyond Good and Evil is a call for a radical re-evaluation of traditional philosophy and morality, and an argument for a new, more critical and individualistic approach to thought and action. Part 2 of Beyond Good and Evil is titled The Free Spirit. Nietzsche here continues his critique of traditional morality in the Christian Church, arguing that they suppress the individual's desires and instincts. He posits that what is generally considered evil by society is simply the expression of a natural, healthy human desire for power and domination. Nietzsche also criticizes the idea of universal truth, instead suggesting that truth is a perspective held by an individual or a group, and that there is no objective, ultimate truth that applies to everyone. He also writes about the concept of eternal recurrence, the idea that everything in the universe will happen again and again in an infinite cycle, and that the goal of the individual should be to embrace life with joy and enthusiasm, in order to affirm existence. Part 3 of Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche is titled What is Religious and consists of 9 short sections. Nietzsche examines various aspects of religion and religious thought, particularly in relation to morality. Nietzsche criticizes the idea of God as a moral lawgiver, arguing that this view reduces human morality to a set of arbitrary rules. He also argues that the Christian emphasis on pity and self-denial is harmful and ultimately leads to weakness and degeneracy. Nietzsche describes the relationship between religion and the development of culture. He suggests that religion is a necessary element in the early stages of culture, but that it becomes increasingly problematic as culture advances. He argues that the Christian view of morality is based on the principle of equality, which he views as a fundamentally flawed and damaging concept. Nietzsche turns to the idea of asceticism, which he sees as a form of self-denial that is both unnecessary and harmful. He examines the idea of eternal recurrence, which he sees as a way of affirming life in the face of the inevitability of death. Nietzsche discusses the idea of the will to power, which he sees as a fundamental aspect of human nature. He argues that this will to power is the source of all creative and destructive forces in human society. He returns to the idea of morality, arguing that moral values are not fixed and universal, but are instead created and enforced by specific groups in specific historical contexts. He criticizes the idea of free will, arguing that our actions are ultimately determined by factors beyond our control. He concludes the section in the book by calling for a new form of philosophy that is unafraid to challenge traditional values and ways of thinking. Part 4 of Beyond Good and Evil consists of a series of shorter sections in which Nietzsche provides aphoristic commentary on a wide range of topics. In these sections, he offers critiques of contemporary philosophy and religion, discusses the nature of truth and knowledge, and offers his own ideas about the nature of the self and the world. Nietzsche criticizes the traditional conception of the soul as a unity, arguing that it is in fact a multiplicity of forces. He also offers a critique of free will, suggesting that it is an illusion and that all human actions are determined by the interplay of various forces. Nietzsche offers a critique of contemporary morality, arguing that it is based on a slave mentality that values obedience and conformity over individual creativity and excellence. Nietzsche offers his famous critique of Christianity, arguing that it is a slave morality that values weakness and humility over strength and power. Nietzsche offers his own vision of a Superman who transcends traditional moral values and creates his own values based on his individual will to power. Nietzsche discusses the idea of eternal recurrence, suggesting that every moment in time is endlessly repeated in an infinite cycle. Throughout Part 4, Nietzsche employs his characteristic aphoristic style, offering sharp and often controversial critiques of traditional philosophical and religious ideas and laying the groundwork for many of his later works. Part 5 of Beyond Good and Evil is entitled Natural History of Morals and is divided into 9 chapters. Nietzsche explores the historical development of morality, and he argues that there are 2 distinct types of morality, master morality and slave morality. He traces the development of slave morality back to the Jews, who were enslaved by the ancient Greeks and Romans. He contrasts the values of the master and the slave, and he criticizes the slave's resentful attitude towards the master. Nietzsche also criticizes the Christian religion, which he sees as an expression of slave morality. He argues that Christianity has turned the natural world upside down by valuing weakness, meekness, and humility, rather than strength, pride, and power. Nietzsche calls for a revaluation of all values and for the development of a new morality based on the will to power. He believes that this new morality will be based on the affirmation of life and the realization of human potential. Part 6 of Beyond Good and Evil is titled We Scholars and contains 9 sections. Nietzsche begins by discussing the state of modern scholarship, which he argues is characterized by an overemphasis on detail and a lack of overarching goals. He criticizes the herd instinct of scholars and the tendency to prioritize the opinions of the majority over those of individuals. Nietzsche also argues that many scholars are more interested in their own status and reputation than in the pursuit of knowledge. He asserts that true scholars must be willing to take risks and challenge convention in order to make new discoveries. In the later sections of Part 6, Nietzsche critiques the academic disciplines of history and philology, arguing that they have been co-opted by religious and political interests. He also argues that the pursuit of knowledge should be driven by a desire for power, rather than a disinterested love of truth. Overall, Part 6 of Beyond Good and Evil is a scathing critique of the state of scholarship in Nietzsche's time, and a call for a new approach to knowledge that prioritizes individual creativity and the pursuit of power. Part 7 of Beyond Good and Evil is titled Our Virtues. In this part, Nietzsche discusses the nature of virtues and their role in human life. He argues that virtues are not universal, timeless concepts, but are instead products of the culture and society in which they arise. Nietzsche critiques the idea of the good and argues that morality should be based on the individual's will to power, rather than conformity to a set of moral codes. He also critiques the idea of selflessness and argues that the pursuit of individual power is not incompatible with love and compassion for others. Overall, Part 7 is a reflection on the nature of human virtue and the role it plays in shaping our lives and societies. Part 8 of Beyond Good and Evil is titled Peoples and Fatherlands. In this section, Nietzsche discusses the concept of nationalism and the dangers of excessive patriotism. He argues that a true patriot loves his country for its virtues and accomplishments, rather than simply because he happened to be born there. He criticizes the idea of fatherlands as a way of dividing people and creating false distinctions based on nationality. Nietzsche believes that people should strive to create a cosmopolitan culture that transcends national boundaries and celebrates the diversity of human experience. He also argues that the concept of race is often used to justify oppression and should be replaced with a focus on individual human potential. In this section, Nietzsche also discusses the role of religion and the need for a new kind of spirituality that is not tied to traditional religious dogma. Part 9 of Beyond Good and Evil is titled What is Noble? In this part, Nietzsche continues to explore the concept of the noble or aristocratic, which he sees as superior to the morality of the common people. He argues that nobility is a matter of character and will, rather than a birth or social position. Nietzsche also discusses the idea of the eternal recurrence, or the notion that every event will recur an infinite number of times, and suggests that the only way to make sense of life in the face of this idea is to affirm it completely. He also contrasts the concept of the last man, who is content with comfort and security and has no desire for greatness or risk, with the figure of the overman, who transcends the limits of humanity and embraces a life of risk, danger, and creativity. Ultimately, Nietzsche argues that the only way to live a truly fulfilling life is to embrace the struggle and uncertainty that comes with the pursuit of excellence, even if it means rejecting the values of the herd. Here are some quotes from Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. It is hard enough to remember my opinions, without also remembering my reasons for them. What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power in man, the will to power, power itself. Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. The essence of all beautiful art, all great art, is gratitude. The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently. There are no eternal facts, as there are no absolute truths. Madness is the exception in individuals but the rule in groups. When we know how to listen, the whole world becomes a symphony. Is life not 100 times too short for us to stifle ourselves? The man of knowledge must be able not only to love his enemies but also to hate his friends. Man is the cruelest animal. It is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages. It is hard enough to remember my opinions, without also remembering my reasons for them. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. Can you tell me about Nietzsche's thoughts on Apollonian and Dionysian impulses in art? Nietzsche's Apollonian and Dionysian impulses in art form part of his philosophy on the dichotomy of human existence. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche explored the tension between the two forces in great culture. The Apollonian represents the ordered, rational, and beautiful aspect of humanity. The Dionysian, on the other hand, represents the irrational, chaotic, and emotional side of humanity. Nietzsche saw tragedy as a synthesis of the two forces. Tragic art is Apollonian in its form but Dionysian in its content. Through the experience of tragedy, the individual is able to reconcile their own Dionysian impulses with their need for Apollonian order. In later works, Nietzsche explored the influence of these forces in different art forms. He argued that the Apollonian and Dionysian forces are present in all art and that the most powerful works of art achieve a balance between the two. He believed that the great artist was able to harness the Dionysian energy while shaping it with the Apollonian form. In essence, Nietzsche believed that art was the best way for humans to connect with their innermost impulses and emotions, and that the tension between the Apollonian and Dionysian forces in art was a reflection of the tension between these forces in human existence. What did Nietzsche mean when he said God is dead? Nietzsche's statement God is dead means that the concept of God or a supreme being has lost its relevance and significance in modern society. Nietzsche believed that religion, and its focus on God, had been used as a way to control people and that the idea of God no longer provided meaning or purpose in people's lives. Instead, he suggested that people needed to look to themselves to create their own values and sense of purpose, rather than relying on an external authority such as God or religion. The idea of God as dead is often seen as a pivotal point in Nietzsche's philosophy, and his emphasis on individual freedom and creativity became a significant influence on modern thought. Give me a summary of the book The Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche. The Gay Science is a book written by Friedrich Nietzsche, first published in 1882. It is a collection of 383 poems and aphorisms that explore the theme of the death of God and the birth of the Superman. In this book, Nietzsche also introduces the idea of the eternal recurrence, which is the concept that life will be repeated again and again, and that we should live our lives as if we would have to relive them over and over. The book is divided into 5 sections, each with a different theme. The first section is titled The Joyful Wisdom and explores the idea of the death of God. The second section is titled The Second Rope and deals with the concept of the eternal recurrence. The third section is titled The Stillest Hour and explores the idea of loneliness and how it can be a source of creativity. The fourth section is titled The Dionysian World and looks at the concept of the Dionysian impulse in art. The final section is titled The Meaning of Our Cheerfulness and explores the idea that our lives are meaningful because they are finite. Overall, The Gay Science is a complex work that touches on a variety of themes, including morality, religion, art, and human existence. It is seen as one of Nietzsche's most accessible works, and it has had a significant impact on Western philosophy and culture. Give me a few quotes from The Gay Science. Sure, here are a few quotes from The Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. What does not kill me, makes me stronger. Art is the supreme task and the truly metaphysical activity in this life. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. We love life, not because we are used to living but because we are used to loving. The true man wants 2 things, danger and play. For that reason he wants woman, as the most dangerous plaything. The greatest happiness you can have is knowing that you do not necessarily require happiness. Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages it is the rule. Tell me about Nietzsche's feelings on the concept of Amor Fati. Nietzsche's concept of Amor Fati is the idea of loving one's fate, even if it is terrible or painful. Rather than trying to escape one's fate, Nietzsche believed that individuals should embrace it and strive to make the best of it. He believed that this attitude was essential for individuals to achieve happiness and fulfillment, and that it allowed them to live a more authentic and fulfilling life. Nietzsche's concept of Amor Fati is closely tied to his idea of eternal recurrence, which suggests that individuals should live their lives as if they were destined to repeat every moment for all eternity. By embracing every moment and aspect of their lives, individuals can become more fully themselves and find greater meaning and purpose. What did Nietzsche think about nihilism? Nietzsche saw nihilism as a consequence of the decline of traditional values and the erosion of the belief in absolute truth. He believed that nihilism was a transitional stage between the decline of the old values and the emergence of new ones. In Nietzsche's view, the rejection of traditional values was necessary to make way for the creation of new, life-affirming values. He saw nihilism as an opportunity to create meaning in a world where traditional values had lost their power, and called on individuals to embrace their own creative potential in order to overcome nihilism and create a new, more fulfilling way of life. Give me a summary of Nietzsche's book The Antichrist. The Antichrist is a book written by Friedrich Nietzsche, in which he criticizes Christianity as a religion that has denied and weakened life. He argues that Christianity has been a destructive force in human history, and that its values are opposed to the values of life. He contends that the Christian concept of God is a denial of the will to life, and that it has led to the devaluation of human existence. Nietzsche also criticizes the morality of Christianity, which he sees as a slave morality that seeks to suppress the will to power. He argues that this morality is harmful to the strong and healthy, and that it has led to the creation of a herd mentality among humans. The book ends with a call for the creation of a new kind of human being who will embrace life and reject the values of Christianity. Tell me about Section 1 of the book The Antichrist by Nietzsche. Section 1 of The Antichrist by Friedrich Nietzsche is titled Christianity as Antinihilism. In this section, Nietzsche critiques Christianity as a religion that stands against nihilism, or the idea that life has no inherent meaning or value. Nietzsche argues that Christianity represents a nihilistic worldview because it posits a transcendent realm of eternal life, which devalues the present world and life in it. According to Nietzsche, Christianity is fundamentally opposed to life and the values that make life worth living, such as joy, creativity, and self-affirmation. He concludes that Christianity is an impediment to the flourishing of human potential and the development of a genuinely life-affirming culture. Section 2 of The Antichrist is entitled The Improvers of Mankind and is divided into 62 aphorisms. In this section, Nietzsche continues his critique of modern morality and Christianity, arguing that both have served to weaken and undermine human potential. He begins by attacking the idea of improving mankind, arguing that any attempt to do so will necessarily involve the use of violence and the suppression of individual freedom. Nietzsche then goes on to argue that Christianity has been one of the main vehicles for this project of improvement, but that it has done so at the expense of human vitality and creativity. He criticizes Christian morality for its emphasis on pity and humility, which he argues has led to a culture of weakness and self-denial. He also argues that the Christian focus on the afterlife has served to devalue this life and the present moment. In place of Christianity and its emphasis on the transcendent, Nietzsche advocates a philosophy of life that celebrates the earthly, the sensual, and the vital. He argues that we must embrace our instincts and passions, and that we must reject the life-denying values of Christianity and modern morality. In doing so, he believes that we can unleash the full potential of human creativity and vitality, and create a new kind of culture that is true to our deepest instincts and desires. What was Nietzsche's opinion of Pascal and Pascal's wager? Nietzsche was highly critical of Blaise Pascal and his famous Pascal's wager argument. Nietzsche saw it as a disgusting piece of prudence and a prime example of Christianity's base and corrupt morality. In his book The Antichrist, Nietzsche critiques Pascal's argument by pointing out that it assumes an arbitrary and dogmatic God, and reduces belief to a calculated risk rather than a genuine conviction. Nietzsche also saw Pascal as an embodiment of the kind of weak and passive Christianity that he despised, writing that he surrendered himself to God, and hoped to escape from himself in this way. What did Nietzsche think about Christian pity? Nietzsche viewed Christian pity as a sign of weakness and a rejection of life. He believed that Christianity turned people into passive and helpless beings who were unable to take responsibility for their own lives. According to Nietzsche, Christian pity was a way for weak individuals to justify their own suffering and to avoid taking action to change their circumstances. He argued that instead of focusing on the suffering of others, individuals should strive to create their own values and find meaning in their own lives. Nietzsche believed that the pursuit of personal excellence and the will to power were essential to a fulfilling life, and that Christian pity was a hindrance to this goal. What did Nietzsche think about Schopenhauer's philosophy? Nietzsche was initially influenced by Schopenhauer's philosophy, particularly his emphasis on the primacy of the will. However, as Nietzsche developed his own philosophical system, he increasingly criticized and distanced himself from Schopenhauer's pessimism and his emphasis on self-denial and asceticism. Nietzsche argued that Schopenhauer's focus on suffering and renunciation was a form of nihilism, and he sought to develop an affirmative philosophy of life that celebrated the will to power and the creative potential of the individual. While Nietzsche acknowledged Schopenhauer's contribution to philosophy, he ultimately rejected his pessimism and embraced a more life-affirming philosophy. What did Nietzsche think of theology and philosophy? Nietzsche had a complex and often critical view of both theology and philosophy. He believed that traditional philosophy, particularly that of Socrates and Plato, had prioritized the abstract and universal over the concrete and particular, leading to a devaluation of the individual and the senses. Nietzsche also criticized Christianity and other theistic religions, arguing that they were based on a belief in a transcendent, supernatural world that undermined the value of this world and the individual's ability to shape their own destiny. However, Nietzsche did not reject the possibility of spiritual or metaphysical experience altogether, and he sought to create a new form of philosophy that was more life-affirming and grounded in the world. What were Nietzsche's thoughts on Buddhism? Nietzsche had a complex relationship with Buddhism. On the one hand, he admired the religion's emphasis on self-mastery and overcoming suffering. He also saw similarities between Buddhism and his own philosophy, particularly in their critiques of the illusions and delusions that underlie human experience. On the other hand, Nietzsche was critical of Buddhism's emphasis on renunciation and its rejection of the world. He saw this as a kind of nihilism, a denial of life that was at odds with his own philosophy of affirmation and the will to power. Nietzsche also criticized what he saw as the passive, otherworldly character of Buddhist ethics, which he felt were at odds with the heroic, life-affirming ethics he advocated. Overall, Nietzsche saw both positive and negative aspects in Buddhism, and he used it as a foil to clarify his own philosophical views. Tell me about Nietzsche's thoughts on the instincts of resentment. Nietzsche had a lot to say about the instincts of resentment, which he believed were the result of the weak seeking to undermine the strong. He thought that people who were unhappy with their lot in life would often look for ways to bring down those who were more successful or powerful than themselves, which he called slave morality. According to Nietzsche, the instincts of resentment lead people to seek revenge against those who are better off than they are. They do this by denigrating the values and accomplishments of the successful, as well as by creating a sense of guilt around those who have achieved great things. Nietzsche saw these instincts as a kind of sickness, one that was all too prevalent in modern society. He believed that they were responsible for much of the unhappiness and misery in the world, and that people needed to overcome them if they wanted to be truly free and happy. In order to do this, Nietzsche advocated for a kind of radical self-affirmation, in which individuals would reject the negative attitudes and values that hold them back and embrace their own unique qualities and abilities. He believed that this was the only way to overcome the instincts of resentment and become the kind of person who can truly flourish in life. Nietzsche's 5 stages of denaturalizing values is a concept that is elaborated in his book The Genealogy of Morals. The idea is that Nietzsche believes that all human values have evolved from certain basic instincts, which have been reinterpreted and reevaluated over time by different cultures and societies. He describes the process of denaturalizing these values, which involves identifying the basic instincts and drives that underlie them and then questioning their validity. The 5 stages of denaturalizing values are as follows. The stage of innocence. In this stage, people are unaware of the origins of their values and take them for granted. The stage of guilt. In this stage, people begin to question the morality of their values and feel guilty for violating them. The stage of bad conscience. In this stage, people begin to see the contradictions and conflicts within their values and experience a sense of inner conflict and anxiety. The stage of the ascetic ideal. In this stage, people begin to adopt a more ascetic lifestyle, rejecting the pleasures and desires of the body in favor of spiritual and moral values. The stage of the revaluation of values. In this final stage, people begin to question the validity of all values and seek to create new ones that are more in line with their basic instincts and drives. Nietzsche argues that this process of denaturalizing values is essential for individuals and societies to evolve and grow, and that it is only by questioning and reevaluating our values that we can achieve true freedom and authenticity. Tell me about Nietzsche's thoughts on master versus slave morality. Nietzsche's concept of master and slave morality is a fundamental part of his philosophy. According to Nietzsche, the ancient Greeks lived under what he called the master morality, which was characterized by strength, beauty, and vitality. In contrast, he argued that Christian morality, which he referred to as a slave morality, was characterized by weakness, humility, and self-denial. For Nietzsche, the master morality was based on the natural impulses of the strong and healthy, who are able to exert their will and impose their values on others. In contrast, the slave morality was developed by those who were weaker and less able to impose their will on the world. According to Nietzsche, slave morality arose as a response to the dominance of the strong, and it seeks to undermine the master morality by valuing qualities such as humility, meekness, and compassion. Nietzsche believed that the Christian religion was the ultimate expression of slave morality. He argued that Christianity was a religion of weakness that sought to devalue the strong and glorify the weak. Nietzsche saw the ultimate expression of the master morality in the figure of the Ubermensch or Superman, an individual who had overcome the limitations of the slave morality and was able to impose his or her will on the world. Overall, Nietzsche believed that the development of a master morality was necessary for the progress and flourishing of humanity. He saw the embrace of the slave morality as a form of weakness and decadence that ultimately led to the decline of civilizations. Here's a short article on Nietzsche's Ubermensch. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch or Superman is one of his most well-known and provocative ideas. This term is often misunderstood and associated with a kind of Nietzschean eugenics or elitism, but the Ubermensch is a far more complex and nuanced idea than that. In this paper, I will explore what the Ubermensch represents, how it relates to Nietzsche's broader philosophical project, and what implications it might have for our own lives and culture. At its simplest, the Ubermensch is an ideal of human flourishing. Nietzsche believed that human beings were not static creatures, but rather constantly evolving and striving to overcome themselves. The Ubermensch represents the highest expression of this evolutionary process, a kind of apex of human possibility. It is someone who has transcended the limits of normal human existence, and has achieved a state of being that is beyond good and evil, beyond the petty concerns of everyday life, and beyond the limits of reason and rationality. For Nietzsche, the Ubermensch was not a concrete person, but rather an ideal or a concept. It was a way of thinking about human potential, and a goal that individuals could strive towards in their own lives. Nietzsche saw the Ubermensch as the antidote to the nihilism that he believed was sweeping through European culture in the late 19th century. He believed that traditional morality, religion, and philosophy had become bankrupt, and that the only way forward was to create a new, higher, and more life-affirming set of values. One of the key features of the Ubermensch is that it is an individualist ideal. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of human life was one that was lived according to the individual's own values and goals, rather than those imposed by society or tradition. The Ubermensch is not concerned with fitting in or following the rules, but rather with creating their own path in life, and pursuing their own unique destiny. This emphasis on individualism is one of the reasons why the concept of the Ubermensch has been criticized as being elitist and narcissistic. Another key feature of the Ubermensch is that it is a creative ideal. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of human life was one that was constantly creating, constantly pushing beyond what was known and exploring new possibilities. The Ubermensch is not content with the status quo, but is always striving to make something new, to break free from the constraints of the past and create something that has never been seen before. This emphasis on creativity is one of the reasons why Nietzsche is often associated with the avant-garde and the modernist movement in art and culture. Finally, the Ubermensch is a joyful ideal. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of human life was one that was filled with joy and exuberance, one that embraced life in all its complexity and vitality. The Ubermensch is not a dour ascetic, but rather someone who revels in the joys of existence and embraces all that life has to offer. This emphasis on joy is one of the reasons why Nietzsche is often associated with the idea of Dionysian celebration, and with a kind of hedonism that is often misunderstood as being purely self-indulgent. In conclusion, Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch is a complex and multifaceted idea that has been interpreted in many different ways over the years. At its core, the Ubermensch is an ideal of human flourishing, a vision of what human beings can become if they are willing to overcome their own limitations and push themselves to new heights. It is an individualist, creative, and joyful ideal, one that is meant to inspire us to live our own lives in a way that is authentic and fulfilling. Give me a summary of the book The Genealogy of Morality. The Genealogy of Morality is a philosophical treatise by Friedrich Nietzsche that explores the origins and development of Western moral values. The book is divided into 3 essays, each of which focuses on a different topic. The first essay, Good and Evil, Good and Bad, explores the distinction between good and bad and good and evil in the context of the slave revolt in morality. Nietzsche argues that the original meaning of good was noble or aristocratic, while the meaning of bad was common or lowly. However, the slave revolt in morality turned this distinction on its head, creating a new morality that valorized traits such as humility and meekness, while demonizing traits such as strength and pride. The second essay, Guilt, Bad Conscience, and Related Matters, examines the origin and function of guilt and bad conscience. Nietzsche argues that guilt and bad conscience were originally used as mechanisms for social control, allowing those in power to keep the lower classes in check. However, with the advent of the slave revolt in morality, guilt and bad conscience became internalized and turned against the individual, leading to the development of the ascetic ideal and the repression of natural instincts. The third essay, What is the Meaning of Ascetic Ideals?, explores the nature of the ascetic ideal and its role in shaping Western culture. Nietzsche argues that the ascetic ideal arose as a reaction to the excesses of the aristocratic ideal, which was characterized by a love of life and a celebration of the body. The ascetic ideal, by contrast, is characterized by a denial of the body and a suppression of natural desires, leading to a culture that is life-denying and anti-nature. Overall, the Genealogy of Morality is a powerful critique of traditional Western morality and an exploration of the origins and development of moral values. Nietzsche's analysis is wide-ranging and provocative, challenging many of the fundamental assumptions of Western culture and forcing readers to reconsider their own beliefs and values. Here are some notable quotes from Nietzsche's The Genealogy of Morality. The doer is merely a fiction added to the deed is everything. What does not kill me makes me stronger. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. There is not enough love and goodness in the world to permit giving any of it away to imaginary beings. It is not when truth is dirty, but when it is shallow, that the lover of knowledge is reluctant to step into its waters. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Morality is the herd instinct in the individual. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. Here's some more information on the Genealogy of Morality. In the first treatise of the Genealogy of Morality, Nietzsche traces the origins of the concept of good and evil and argues that it originally arose from the distinction between the noble and the common people. He claims that the noble class, who were strong and powerful, saw themselves as good, while the weak and powerless were seen as bad. However, over time, the weak and powerless began to resent the strong, and in order to gain power, they began to redefine what was considered good and evil in a way that favored their own interests. This led to the rise of slave morality, which values humility, obedience, and selflessness over strength and power. Nietzsche argues that this inversion of values has led to a society that is weak and sick, and that the only way to overcome this is to reject the values of slave morality and return to the values of the noble class. The second treatise of the Genealogy of Morality is titled Guilt, Bad Conscience, and Related Matters. In this treatise, Nietzsche explores the origins and evolution of the concept of guilt and how it has shaped human society and morality. Nietzsche argues that guilt and bad conscience originated from the need to control and repress human instincts, particularly those related to aggression and violence. He contends that the early humans expressed their aggression freely without any sense of guilt, and that guilt emerged when people started living in larger groups and needed to suppress their natural instincts in order to coexist peacefully. Nietzsche also examines the role of punishment in society and argues that punishment serves to make people feel guilty and reinforces the idea that certain actions are inherently bad. He criticizes the Christian notion of original sin and the idea that people are inherently sinful and must seek redemption. Nietzsche suggests that a more life-affirming morality should be based on the idea of self-mastery rather than the repression of instincts. He encourages people to embrace their natural instincts and urges them to channel their energies in positive ways. Nietzsche believed that a new type of human being, the Ubermensch, would emerge when individuals overcame their feelings of guilt and bad conscience and learned to live authentically and creatively. The third and final treatise in Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality is entitled What Do Ascetic Ideals Mean? In this treatise, Nietzsche examines the ascetic ideals of Christianity and their impact on Western civilization. Nietzsche argues that Christianity's ascetic ideals are rooted in a deep sense of resentment towards life and the body. He sees the Christian ideal of self-denial as a rejection of life in favor of an otherworldly existence. He argues that the ascetic ideal represents a profound form of self-mutilation, a denial of one's own nature. Nietzsche further claims that the ascetic ideal has become deeply ingrained in Western culture and has had a profound impact on the development of modern morality. He argues that the denial of the body has led to a devaluation of life and the promotion of self-sacrifice as the highest virtue. In contrast to the ascetic ideal, Nietzsche proposes a new ideal, which he calls the will to power. This ideal emphasizes the affirmation of life in the body, rather than their denial. He argues that this ideal represents a more authentic and natural way of being, and that it is the only path to genuine self-realization. Overall, the third treatise of the Genealogy of Morality represents a powerful critique of Christianity and its influence on Western culture. Nietzsche's alternative vision of the will to power represents a radical challenge to the prevailing values of his time, and continues to influence philosophical and cultural thought to this day. Compare Nietzsche's philosophy versus Max Stirner's philosophy. Nietzsche and Max Stirner were both influential 19th-century philosophers who developed ideas that continue to have an impact on modern thought. While there are similarities between their philosophies, there are also significant differences. One major difference between Nietzsche and Stirner is their respective views on individualism. Nietzsche believed that the individual should strive to become an overman, or superman, who rises above the constraints of society and creates his own values. Stirner, on the other hand, believed in the importance of the individual, but saw society as a form of oppression that must be rejected in favor of the individual's own desires. Another difference between the two philosophers is their views on power. Nietzsche saw power as a natural part of human existence, and believed that the individual should embrace it in order to become a stronger and more creative person. Stirner, on the other hand, rejected traditional forms of power and authority, and believed that the individual should reject these structures in order to fully realize their own potential. Finally, Nietzsche and Stirner have different attitudes toward morality. Nietzsche believed that traditional morality was a form of weakness, and that the individual should create their own values rather than blindly following society's moral codes. Stirner, on the other hand, believed that morality was a form of oppression, and that the individual should reject moral codes in order to fully embrace their own desires and individuality. In summary, Nietzsche and Stirner share a focus on individualism and a rejection of traditional forms of authority, but have different views on the role of power and morality in human existence. Summarize the book Human, All Too Human. Human, All Too Human is a book written by Friedrich Nietzsche, first published in 1878. The book is a collection of aphorisms and essays that reflect Nietzsche's critical and skeptical views on various subjects such as culture, religion, morality, philosophy, and human nature. In this book, Nietzsche challenges conventional wisdom and exposes many of the flaws and contradictions that he sees in traditional thought. He argues that human beings are not guided by divine or transcendent principles, but by their own instincts and desires. He also claims that morality is a human invention and that it is constantly changing over time. The book is divided into 9 parts, each of which explores a different topic. Some of the major themes in the book include the relationship between reason and emotion, the role of religion in society, the nature of free will and determinism, and the meaning of existence. Nietzsche's writing style is often aphoristic, meaning that he expresses his ideas in short, pithy statements that are designed to provoke thought and reflection. Overall, Human, All Too Human is an important work in Nietzsche's oeuvre, as it marks a transition between his earlier, more romantic works and his later, more critical and skeptical writings. The book offers a fascinating insight into Nietzsche's thought and is a must-read for anyone interested in philosophy, culture, or human nature. Summarize Nietzsche's book, The Birth of Tragedy. The Birth of Tragedy is a book by Friedrich Nietzsche that deals with the origins and nature of ancient Greek tragedy. Nietzsche argues that Greek tragedy was born from a dialectical tension between two fundamental forces in Greek culture, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian impulse represents order, reason, and rationality, while the Dionysian represents chaos, passion, and irrationality. Nietzsche contends that tragedy arises from the fusion of these two impulses, which results in a synthesis of order and chaos, of rationality and irrationality. He argues that this synthesis is necessary for the creation of great art and that it is a fundamental aspect of the human condition. The book also contains an analysis of the decline of Greek tragedy and its replacement by Socratic philosophy, which Nietzsche saw as a destructive force that led to the suppression of the Dionysian impulse and the impoverishment of human culture. The Birth of Tragedy is considered one of Nietzsche's most important works and a key text in the development of his philosophy. Nietzsche on the far left. His negative attitude towards socialism and proletarian movement was one of the most consistent themes in Nietzsche's philosophy. He wrote negatively of socialism as early as 1862, and his criticisms of socialism are often harsher than those of other doctrines. He was critical of French Revolution and was deeply disturbed by the Paris Commune, which he saw as a destructive insurrection of the vulgar lower classes that made him feel annihilated for several days. In his later writings, he especially praised contemporary French authors, most of whom were right-wing thinkers whose works expressed a strongly negative response to the Commune and its political heritage. Summarized Nietzsche's book The Twilight of the Idols. The Twilight of the Idols is a collection of aphorisms written by Friedrich Nietzsche in 1888. In the book, Nietzsche criticizes various elements of modern culture and Western philosophy, including the concept of truth, the role of religion in society, and the morality of Christianity. He also discusses his views on art, literature, and language, and introduces his ideas of the will to power and the eternal recurrence. The book is written in a highly polemical and provocative style, and is seen by some as a precursor to Nietzsche's later and more famous work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Hopefully this has been a helpful overview of Nietzsche's philosophy and books. Most of this information was Chat-GPT assisted, so let me know if anything sounds off. From what I know about Nietzsche, this information seems to be accurate. Learn more about Friedrich Nietzsche on Wikipedia. I've listed the URL below. Thanks for watching.